Hi, I'm Tom Johnson. I'm the founder and CEO of HoldCrunch. At HoldCrunch, we quantify the impact of price, so odds lines, on the market share dynamics of US sportsbooks. What we're going to show you is that there is, in fact, a tipping point where sportsbooks will have to start changing their odds in order to compensate for tax increases. What you can see on this chart is the relative competitiveness on price, or RTP, return to player, of US sportsbooks. The closer the line is to the zero at the top, the better the prices offered to customers. So if you look across the graph at DraftKings in green and FanDuel in blue, you can see that they offer prices pretty much within a range of each other consistently in 2023 and 2024. The white line is the average of the main challengers. And what you can see is that in 2023, they were far less competitive on price than they are now in 2024. This second chart simply breaks out the challengers. And if you look at the top right, you can see a real cluster around FanDuel and DraftKings, with the exception of Caesars, although you can see Caesars becoming more competitive in the recent quarter. So FanDuel, BetMGM, Fanatics, DraftKings, and ESPN Bet in the middle of the top right, all clustered in the same area. This is where we are today on price, a competitive market. Now we're going to look at tax. And what we're going to do is we're going to slowly increase the blended tax rate from last year's rate and show how certain sportsbooks at certain levels are going to firstly reduce their promo spend and then offer worse odds to customers. The first column is GGR hold. So these are the reported numbers from all the states that report at an operator level. The next three columns are costs against that reported hold. So the first is promo spend. That's a cost against hold. The second is price. Now, if we have to start offering worse prices, that can have a beneficial impact on hold. In the same way that if we offer better prices, then hold rates would be challenged. All of that column is currently at zero because in this state, these were the prices that you saw on the previous graphs, so no change in price. The next column is tax. So we've made an estimate here around 22% of the blended tax rate across all states. And then the last column is what we call net margin before operating expenses. In other words, this is hold minus promos minus any changes in price minus tax. This next table is our first tax increase. What we're doing is increasing the blended rate by 7.5%. So tax has gone up from around 22% to close to 30%. And the first thing we're going to adjust is promo spend. So what we're doing here is we're imagining each book reducing promo spend to the 30% of GGR hold level. At that level, with tax going up to near 30% and promo spend going down to 30%, you can see on the right-hand side, net margin before operating expenses is still above the 3.5% mark for all books, with the exception of Caesars. We've chosen 3.5% as an indicative number of where books need to make net margin before operating expenses. It might be slightly higher, it might be slightly lower. Now we're going to ratchet up the tax rate even further. We're going to go to 10% above the blended rate in 2023. So you can see in the taxation column, we're close to 32%. Promos we're going to keep the same at 30% of GGR hold. And on the right-hand side, you can see net margin before operating expenses. But with Fanatics, in order to keep their sportsbook above that 3.5% net margin level, we've had to make an adjustment in the price column, the middle column. What we're saying here is Fanatics is offering worse prices that are the equivalent of a hold boost of 2.5%, which is why the number there is minus 2.5%. So it's a benefit to hold through worse prices. And finally, we're really going to step on the gas and take the tax rate 15% higher than last year's blended rate, so close to a 36-37% overall range. So tax is getting into the 36-37% range. Promo spend is the same, but for net margin before operating expenses to remain above the 3.5% level with such a high tax rate, everyone is now having to change prices with the exception of FanDuel. So Fanatics has had to offer worse prices, which gives them an equivalent of a 7.5% boost to hold. BetMGM and DraftKings have also had to offer worse prices with a 5% change. So there are two big insights in our data. The first, unfortunately for operators, is that there is room for tax to increase without prices having to change. If anyone wants to stay at 50-60% promos of GGR, that is perhaps not necessary if you're competing on price. So tax could go up by somewhere around 5, 6, 7% above last year's blended rate, and operators would not have to change prices. The second point, though, is that there is a place where tax fundamentally changes the dynamics in the market. And that is somewhere above the 7.5% level, the 30% blended rate, so 7.5% above last year's blended rate. If tax reaches that level, and even further, 10-15% above last year's blended rate, then we start to see the challengers struggling. We start to see handle migration towards the bigger players, which is what we measure at HoldCrunch. That's distances on price that move handle share, and then consolidation in the top two in the market, and in particular, FanDuel. So, to sum it all up, there is no data in the tax debate at the moment. It's either lobbying saying that taxes are bad, or it's states putting taxes up. What we do at HoldCrunch is bring real data into that debate, and the key message is there is a tipping point, and that should be observed. So who are these insights for? Firstly, if you're an investor and you're following tax rates and wondering what the impact is on US sportsbooks, then this data is really important. You should not worry, perhaps, if tax goes up slightly, but you should be worried about the market impact if tax goes up further than this 7.5% tipping point. Secondly, if you're an operator, then this is something to think about and use. In other words, saying that all taxes are bad and all tax increases will move customers offshore or will have to change odds is not necessarily true. On the other hand, there should be real strength in the argument from operators that there is a tipping point where tax really will change odds. There is a truth in that, but it's about understanding and articulating where that tipping point is and being precise about it. Thirdly, if you are a state regulator or governor and you want to put tax rates up, then this data is important because there is a level at which tax can increase. On the other hand, there may be points where tax goes up to a high enough rate where market dynamics are impacted, and the net result is less taxes for the state coffers. So for investors and operators, and for state regulators and tax authorities, here is some exciting and interesting and very important data about tax.